Her true story from Arkansas. You're a weight on my life. She texted, so I canceled the payments that kept her afloat. The Arkansas humidity hangs heavy in August, thick as a quilt and just as suffocating if you let it. It clings to your skin like a desperate lover, seeps into the wood of the porch swing until it creaks with moisture, and quiets the world down to the drone of cicadas and the slow, measured beat of your own heart. The air itself seems to shimmer with heat, distorting the horizon where the Ozark Hills meet the sky in a hazy embrace. For 30 years, my heart had beaten for one person, my daughter, Chloe. Each beat was a prayer, a hope, a sacrifice wrapped in unconditional love. I thought that rhythm was the sound of love itself, steady and eternal. It took a single text message, delivered on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, to teach me it was actually the sound of a countdown timer, ticking away the moments until my own awakening. My name is Sarah Miller, and this is the story of how I learned that cutting someone off isn't an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. It's the story of how I discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling the very person you'd die for. The message arrived at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon. I know the precise time because I was on my hands and knees in the garden, my fingers buried deep in the dark, rich Arkansas soil that smelled of rain and earthworms and possibility. The earth was still damp from the morning dew, cool against my palms despite the heat pressing down from above. I was tending to the lavender plants rows upon rows of purple-gray stalks that I'd been cultivating for 3 years now, each plant carefully spaced, lovingly watered, religiously pruned. The lavender wasn't just for beauty, though it did make the whole backyard smell like a French countryside I'd never seen. It was for Chloe's business, Ozark Apothecary, a boutique shop she'd opened in the touristy part of Eureka Springs. The name alone had cost her $500 to have designed by what she called a brand consultant. She made artisanal soaps, lotions, and candles, all with ingredients she claimed were ethically sourced and wild harvested. The truth was, most of them were harvested from my backyard, processed in my kitchen, and packaged on my dining room table while I made us both grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. My phone buzzed from its perch on the porch rail, a shrill digital intrusion that felt alien in the natural symphony of the afternoon. The sound cut through the gentle hum of bees working my flower beds, the distant lowing of cattle in Henderson's pasture next door, and the rhythmic scrape of my garden trowel against the soil. I wiped my hands on my apron, one I'd sewn myself from old flour sacks, embroidered with tiny sunflowers during the long winter evenings when television wasn't enough to fill the silence, and walked over to check the message. My lower back protested as I straightened up, a reminder of all those years standing on concrete floors, but I ignored it. I assumed the message was from Chloe, asking for another delivery of dried chamomile or rosemary, maybe requesting that I drop by the shop with some of the lavender sachets I'd been making. She'd been running low, and the tourist season was in full swing. The screen lit up with her name, and my heart did that little skip it always did when I heard from her. Even at 58, even after all these years of motherhood, the sight of my daughter's name still filled me with the same warm anticipation I'd felt when she took her first steps. The message was short, brutal, and stripped of all punctuation, as if she couldn't be bothered to waste a single comma on courtesy, let alone love. Mom, I need you to stop asking when I am coming to visit. You're a weight on my life right now. I have a brand to build. A weight on her life. The words didn't just sting, they reached into my chest and scooped out everything vital, leaving behind a hollow space that echoed with 30 years of lullabies and bedtime stories and proud moments at school plays. I stood there in the afternoon heat, the scent of lavender still clinging to my hands, the Arkansas sun beating down on my neck like a judgment, and read the message again, and again. And once more, hoping somehow the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't turn my entire existence into a burden. A weight, the woman who had carried her for 9 months, feeling every kick and hiccup as a miracle. The woman who had worked double shifts at the Tyson poultry processing plant for 18 years, coming home with fingers so numb from the cold that I couldn't button my own coat, just to make sure she had clothes that weren't from Walmart and school supplies that didn't embarrass her. The woman who had cashed in her small retirement fund every penny I'd saved by bringing bologna sandwiches to work, instead of buying from the cafeteriato, give her the seed money for her precious brand. I wasn't her mother, her supporter, her biggest cheerleader, the woman who still had every single one of her childhood drawings magneted to my refrigerator. I was a weight. I didn't reply immediately. I didn't cry, though my eyes burned with the effort of holding back tears. Something inside me went very still and very cold, like a deep Ozark lake freezing over in the depths of winter when the temperature drops so fast that the ice forms in sheets, trapping everything beneath in perfect clarity. I sat down on the top step of the porch, the weathered wood warm beneath me from hours of afternoon sun, and I just thought. I thought about the life I had built with my own two hands, the sacrifices I had made without a second thought, and the financial river that had been flowing steadily from my modest bank account directly into hers for the past 2 years, keeping her entrepreneurial dream afloat while she complained about the weight of the water's source. I thought about the irony of it all, how the very money that sustained her brand came from a woman she now considered dead weight. The evening stretched long and quiet around me. I didn't cook dinner, just made myself a cup of chamomile tea ground in my own garden, naturally, and sat on the porch swing until the fireflies began their nightly dance. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of music from Henderson's place, probably his grandson practicing guitar on the back porch. It was a lonely sound, but not as lonely as the silence from my phone. That night, after a dinner composed of toast and more tea that I barely tasted, I didn't reach for the photo albums I usually turn to when I was feeling low. I didn't need to see her gap-toothed kindergarten smile or her proud pose at high school graduation. Those images were burned into my memory anyway, and right now they felt more like evidence in a case I was building against my own heart. Instead, I went to the old roll-top desk in the corner of my living room, the one piece of furniture my own mother had left me. Solid oak that had survived 3 generations of women who knew the value of keeping careful records. I pulled out the metal file box marked Finances in my careful cursive handwriting, the same handwriting I'd used to sign permission slips and birthday cards and, apparently, my own financial death warrant. This was my ledger, my accounting of love, not a notebook of handwritten slights or imagined grievances, but years of bank statements, loan agreements, and canceled checks. The story they told was clearer and more brutal than any photograph, more honest than any memory I'd polished with time and maternal devotion. I spread the papers across the desk like a financial archaeologist, excavating the layers of my own generosity. There it was, right on top, the initial withdrawal slip from July 15th, 2 years ago. $40,000 from my 401k, the retirement fund I'd been building one $20 contribution at a time since I was 25 years old. The memo line, written in my own hopeful handwriting, read, "For my Chloe's dream." I remembered that day clearly. Chloe had come to me with a business plan printed on glossy paper, full of charts and graphs and words like market penetration and brand synergy. Her eyes had been shining with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen since she was 12 and discovered she could make jewelry from the colored glass we'd find along the Buffalo River. She'd spread the papers across this same desk, talking a mile a minute about artisanal this and handcrafted that, about how people were hungry for authenticity and tired of big corporations. "It's a sure thing, Mom," she'd promised, her voice breathless with enthusiasm. "People want stories now. They want to know where their products come from, who made them." And our Storia, mother-daughter team, passing down traditions from generation to generation is perfect. It's pure marketing gold. A mother-daughter team, that's exactly what she'd called us. I'd felt so proud, so included in her vision of success. I'd signed that withdrawal slip with a hand that didn't shake, a heart that was full of hope, and a mind that was already imagining us working side by side, sharing the satisfaction of building something beautiful together. Then there was the next document. The co-signed loan agreement for the custom van she used for what she called pop-up markets and brand activations. A spotless white Ford Transit with Ozark Apothecary painted in elegant script along the sides, complete with her Lagoa stylized lavender sprig that had cost another $300 to design. The monthly payment was $450, automatically debited from my checking account because her own credit was still what the bank politely called developing. I remembered the day we'd picked up that van from the dealership in Little Rock. Chloe had been practically vibrating with excitement, taking selfies with the keys, posting Instagram stories about taking the brand mobile. I'd been so happy to see her happy, so proud to be part of making her dreams come true. The salesman had shaken my hand and called me a generous mother, and I'd felt like I was winning at the only job that had ever really mattered to me. And then there was the killer, the document that made my breath catch in my chest like I'd been punched. A recurring automatic transfer agreement set up 18 months ago when she'd called me crying, saying that sales were slower than expected and she couldn't make rent on the shop. Her voice had been small and scared, so different from her usual confident social media persona. "Mom, I hate to ask," she'd whispered into the phone, "but could you help me out just this once, just until I get back on my feet? The tourist season is starting soon, and I know things will pick up, but right now..." Just this once had become every month for a year and a half, $1,500, every single month. Transferred from the Sarah Miller savings account to the Ozark Apothecary LLC business account on the first of each month, as regular as sunrise, as reliable as my own heartbeat. I did the math slowly, methodically, writing the numbers down on a scrap of paper like I was balancing my checkbook. The $40,000 for the startup costs, $10,800 for the van payments so far 24 months at $450 each, $27,000 in monthly support payments 18 months at $1,500 each. That came to $77,800. I stared at that number, written in my own careful handwriting, $77,800. It represented nearly every penny I had saved over a lifetime of standing on my feet for 10 hours a day in a building that smelled of bleach and death and desperation. It was the money I'd set aside one painful dollar at a time, skipping movies and restaurants and new clothes, choosing generic brands and clipping coupons and driving my old Toyota until the floor was more rust than metal. It was my security, my safety net, my hope for a comfortable old age, and I had poured it all into a brand that apparently viewed me as dead weight. I thought about my life, really thought about it, maybe for the first time in years. I wasn't a woman of grand dreams or impossible ambitions. My dream had been beautifully simple: to raise a good daughter, to see her happy and successful and maybe settled with someone who loved her. To maybe one day have grandchildren I could teach to garden and can vegetables and appreciate the simple pleasures that had sustained me through decades of hard work. I had never been to the ocean, though I'd dreamed of it since I was a girl reading adventure books from the library. I had never taken a real vacation, unless you counted the weekend trips to hot springs when Chloe was little, staying in budget motels and swimming in the public pools. My only real luxury was the satellite TV subscription I paid for every month, $68 that I justified because it gave me access to the British baking shows that Chloe used to love when she was a teenager. We'd watch them together on Sunday afternoons, her head on my shoulder, both of us marveling at the elaborate cakes and commenting on the contestants' techniques. Those Sunday afternoons felt like a lifetime ago now. I had worked at the Tyson plant in Springdale from the time I was 20 straight out of high school, pregnant and abandoned by a boy who promised me the world and delivered only heartbreak. I'd worked there until I was forced into early retirement at 58 when my back finally gave out from years of repetitive motion and lifting cases that were too heavy for someone my size. It wasn't glamorous work. The plant was cold-kept at 40 degrees to preserve the meat and loud enough that we all had to wear ear protection. The smell was something you never got used to, something that clung to your clothes and hair and followed you home despite the industrial showers they provided. It was repetitive work that left your hands cramped and your back screaming, but it was honest work. It paid the bills. It paid for Chloe's ballet lessons when she was 7, her art supplies when she discovered painting in middle school, Her first Cara beat-up Ford Escort with 160,000 miles that she was embarrassed to drive, but which got her to her community college classes reliably. She was always artistic, my Chloe, always dreaming of a life more beautiful and creative than the one we had. She'd press flowers between the pages of old books, creating delicate arrangements that she'd frame with construction paper and give to me for Mother's Day. She'd make drawings of the Ozark Hills, capturing the way the morning mist clung to the valleys in soft pencil strokes. She'd talk about opening a little shop one day where everything was natural and beautiful and smelled like home. I'd encouraged every dream, every artistic impulse. When other parents were pushing their kids toward practical careers, I was buying Chloe art supplies with money I should have been saving for retirement. When she wanted to study art in college instead of nursing or teaching, I'd supported her choice, even when my coworkers shook their heads and muttered about starving artists. When she came to me 2 years ago with her business plan, her eyes shining with that familiar excitement, her presentation full of words I didn't fully understand but recognized as important to her, I didn't hesitate. I saw the passion in her eyes, the same intensity she'd had as a child when she'd discovered she could make dyes from berries and flowers. I saw my little girl all grown up, ready to turn her dreams into reality, and I wanted nothing more than to make that possible. "It's not just a business, Mom," she'd explained, her hands moving expressively as she talked. "It's a lifestyle brand. It's about connecting people to the earth, to tradition, to authenticity. Everything is handmade, everything has a story. And our story, a mother and daughter working together, preserving old ways in a modern world, that's what people are craving." A mother and daughter working together. The phrase had filled me with such hope, such anticipation. I'd imagined us side by side in her shop, me sharing the knowledge I'd gained from 40 years of gardening, and she bringing the marketing savvy and artistic vision that would make it all profitable. I'd pictured customers listening as we told them about the lavender's healing properties, the way chamomile could soothe both body and spirit, the ancient wisdom embedded in simple, natural remedies. The business had started well enough, at least from the outside. Her Instagram account grew steadily, reaching 10,000 followers within the first year. The photos were beautiful, fully arranged herbs, her hands pouring soap into rustic molds, satisfied customers at the farmer's market holding her products like treasures. She was featured in Arkansas Life magazine, a 2-page spread with photos of her in her shop, surrounded by her creations. The headline read, "Young Entrepreneur Brings Ancient Wisdom to Modern Lives." I'd bought 5 copies of that magazine, sending them to relatives and keeping one for myself that I'd read so many times the pages were soft as fabric. I'd been so proud, telling everyone at the grocery store and the post office about my daughter, the successful businesswoman. But I also saw the bank statements. I knew the truth behind the Instagram filters and glossy magazine photos. The business wasn't profitable, it was barely breaking even on its best months. It was a beautiful, expensive hobby, subsidized entirely by a retired factory worker's life savings. The brand she was building was constructed on the foundation of my sacrifice, and apparently, she'd forgotten who had laid that foundation. The signs of her growing resentment had been there for months, but I had chosen to ignore them, to explain them away as stress or the normal growing pains of a new business. When I'd visit her shop, bringing fresh herbs or helping to restock the shelves, she'd introduce me to customers as Sarah, my helper. Never my mother or my business partner. The omission stung, but I told myself she was just trying to maintain a professional image. When I'd call to ask how sales were going or if she needed anything from the garden, she'd sigh dramatically and say, "Mom, I'm really busy right now. This is my work time. I'll call you back when I have a free moment." She never did call back. I'd have to call again a few days later, and the conversation would be brief, distracted, filled with the clicking of her computer keyboard as she multitasked her way through our mother-daughter relationship. The visits to my little house in the country grew less and less frequent, each one shorter and more perfunctory than the last. First, it was every weekend, just like when she was in college and came home to do laundry and raid my refrigerator. Then it became every other weekend. Then once a month. Then only on major holidays, and even then, she'd arrive late and leave early, claiming she had brand responsibilities that couldn't wait. The last time she'd been to my house was Easter 3 months ago. She'd arrived 2 hours late for dinner, explaining that she'd had to handle a social media crisis apparently. Someone had left a negative review of her lavender soap, claiming it dried out their skin. She'd spent most of the afternoon hunched over her phone, typing responses to comments and engaging with her audience. When I'd asked her to put the phone down for dinner, she'd looked at me like I'd suggested she stop breathing. "Mom, you don't understand," she'd said, her voice sharp with irritation. "This is my livelihood. My online presence is everything. One negative comment can snowball into a reputation disaster if I don't manage it properly." She'd left before we'd finished the apple pie I'd made from scratch, claiming she had to get back to prep for a major online sale event. I'd wrapped up half the pie for her to take, and it had sat in my refrigerator for 2 weeks before I finally threw it away, the sight of it a daily reminder of how little time she had for the woman who was funding her dreams. I closed the file box slowly, the metal edges catching the lamplight. The coldness in my chest had solidified into something hard and unmovable, a decision. She thought I was a weight? Fine. I was about to show her what it felt like to be truly weightless, to discover how heavy the world becomes when you don't have someone else carrying the load. The next morning, I didn't follow my usual routine. I didn't weed the garden or harvest herbs for her business. I didn't check my phone to see if she'd sent any follow-up messages or perhaps an apology. Instead, I put on my best Sunday dress, a simple floral print in navy and white that I'd had for 10 years but had only worn to church and funeral sand, drove my 20-year-old Toyota Camry into town. The morning was already hot, the kind of Arkansas heat that makes the asphalt shimmer and the air itself feel thick enough to swim through. My car's air conditioning had given up the ghost 2 summers ago, so I drove with the windows down, my hair whipping around my face, feeling strangely exhilarated by the rushing air and the sense of purpose that filled me like a religious conversion. I didn't go to a lawyer's office. My problem wasn't legal, it was financial and, more fundamentally, emotional. I needed to stop the bleeding, to close the wound I'd been keeping open with my own generosity. I walked into the main branch of Arvest Bank on Main Street, the same institution where I'd opened my first savings account with $25 of babysitting money when I was 16 years old. The building was newer now, all glass and chrome instead of the old brick structure I remembered, but the principle was the same. This was where people came to take control of their financial lives. The air conditioning was a blessed relief after the humid morning air, and I stood for a moment in the lobby, letting the cool air dry the perspiration on my forehead and gathering my thoughts. A few customers were ahead of me, and I used the waiting time to rehearse what I was going to say to make sure I didn't lose my nerve. When my turn came, I was directed to a desk where a young woman sat behind a nameplate that read, Brenda Martinez, Financial Solutions Specialist. She was maybe 30, with kind eyes and a patient smile that reminded me a little of Chloe at that age, before success and social media had hardened her edges. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," Brenda said brightly, consulting her computer screen. "I see you've been a customer with us for, my goodness, over 40 years. What can we help you with today?" I sat down in the chair across from her desk, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield. "I need to make some changes to my account," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I have 2 automatic payments that I would like to cancel, effective immediately." Brenda's fingers moved quickly across her keyboard, her brow furrowing slightly as she pulled up my account information. "Okay, I can see them here. One is an auto loan payment for a vehicle. That's $450 monthly to First National Auto Finance, and the other is a monthly transfer to a business account, Ozark Apothecary LLC, $1,500. Is that correct?" "That's correct," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "And you'd like to cancel both of these?" she asked, looking up at me with a slightly concerned expression. "I just need to let you know, for the auto loan, if the payment isn't made by the due date, the account will go into default and could result in repossession of the vehicle. Are you sure you want to proceed with that cancellation?" I understand completely, I said, meeting her eyes directly. The vehicle isn't mine. I was helping someone else with the payments, and that arrangement is ending. I see, Brenda said diplomatically. And for the business transfer, that's quite a significant amount. $1,500 monthly adds up to $18,000 a year. Are you absolutely certain you want to cancel it? There's no penalty for cancellation, of course, but I just want to make sure this is what you intend to do. I looked Brenda straight in the eye, and for the first time in months, I felt a small, sad smile touch my lips. Young lady, I said, my voice carrying the weight of 30 years of motherhood and 2 years of financial martyrdom, I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life. She didn't ask any more questions after that, perhaps hearing something in my tone that suggested this was not a decision made lightly or in haste. She printed out 2 cancellation forms, each one requiring my signature and the date. I signed my name at the bottom of each document with a firm, clear, the handwriting of a woman who was no longer a weight dragging someone else down, but an anchor who had just decided to cut the rope and see how well her ship could sail on its own. The entire process took less than 15 minutes. As I walked out of the bank into the bright Arkansas sunshine, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the oppressive humidity that seemed to have lifted, it was something deeper, something that had been pressing down on my chest for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. I drove home slowly, taking the scenic route along the Buffalo River, where the water ran clear and cold over ancient limestone, and the morning light filtered through the canopy of oak and hickory trees. I pulled over at a small roadside park and walked down to the water's edge, where I'd brought Chloe to swim when she was little. The river looked exactly the same as it had 20 years, timeless, patient, indifferent to human drama. I spent the afternoon on my front porch, reading a novel I'd bought months ago but had never found the peace of mind to open. It was a simple story about a woman who inherited a farm and learned to find joy in small things: morning coffee, the satisfaction of a well-tended garden, the friendship of neighbors who didn't want anything from her except her company. It seemed impossibly luxurious to spend hours reading without checking my phone, without wondering if Chloe needed something, without calculating how much money was flowing out of my account towards someone who saw me as an inconvenience. That evening, I cooked myself a proper dinner for the first time in weeks: pork chops with apple stuffing, green beans from my garden, and cornbread made from my grandmother's recipe. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, realizing how much of my life I'd been rushing through lately, always distracted by someone else's needs and demands. It took 4 days for the silence to break. I spent those 4 days reclaiming my life in small but significant ways, like a woman recovering from a long illness and gradually remembering what health felt like. On the first day, I bought a new rose bush for my gardenia, beautiful deep red variety called Mr. Lincoln, that I'd been admiring at the nursery for months but had never splurged on. It cost $37, money I would have thought twice about spending when I was transferring $1,500 a month to someone who couldn't be bothered to use proper punctuation in her text messages. On the second day, I spent an entire afternoon on my porch swing, reading and watching the clouds build up over the hills, the kind of peaceful afternoon I hadn't allowed myself in years. Mrs. Henderson from next door stopped by with fresh tomatoes from her garden, and we sat together for an hour, talking about everything and nothing: the weather, the state of the roads, the new family that had moved into the old Morrison place. It was the kind of easy, undemanding companionship I'd almost forgotten existed. On the third day, I made a big pot of my mother's beef stew, the kind with lots of garlic and onions that filled the house with the smell of comfort and tradition. I ate it right out of the pot while watching a British baking show, and for the first time in months, I actually tasted my food instead of just consuming it mechanically while worrying about other things. On the fourth day, Friday, I drove into town and visited the library, checking out 3 novels and a biography of Julia Child that I'd been wanting to read. The librarian, Mrs. Planchprossen Evriate Patterson, whom I'd known since Chloe was in elementary school, commented on how relaxed I looked. "You seem different, Sarah," she said as she stamped my books. "Lighter somehow. Have you been taking vitamins?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Something like that, I told her. The first phone call came that same Friday, just after 5 p.m., while I was watering my new rose bush and admiring how quickly it was settling into its new home. The evening air was finally beginning to cool, and the cicadas were starting their nightly chorus. My phone rang from the kitchen table where I'd left it, and I saw Chloe's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, I went inside and played the message. It was a masterpiece of confused entitlement delivered in the breathless, slightly panicked tone of someone who'd just discovered that the world doesn't automatically bend to accommodate their needs. Mom, hi, it's me. I just got a really weird call from my landlord saying my rent payment for the shop bounced. I don't understand what happened. The transfer always goes through on the first of the month like clockwork. Did you maybe change banks or something? Or is there some kind of technical problem with the automatic transfer? It's really embarrassing, honestly. Mr. Peterson seemed pretty upset, and he's usually so understanding. Could you please call me back as soon as you get this? I need to get this sorted out ASAP before it becomes a bigger problem. Thanks, Mom, love you. The casual assumption that I would immediately fix whatever had gone wrong, the complete lack of awareness that her financial crisis might be the result of her own behavior, the perfunctory "love you" tacked on at the end, like an afterthought, it was all so perfectly typical that I almost had to admire the consistency. I deleted the message without a second thought. The second call came an hour later. While I was making myself a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup for dinner, comfort food that reminded me of the simple meals Chloe and I had shared when she was young and still thought I was the smartest person in the world. This time her voice was tighter, laced with irritation, and a hint of the imperious tone she'd developed since becoming a business owner. Mom, seriously, what is going on? I still haven't heard back from you, and now my main supplier just called saying their invoice payment was declined too. This is turning into a complete disaster. I have the Eureka Springs Artisan Market this weekend. It's one of my biggest sales events of the year, and I don't have any materials to make new inventory. My whole fall line was supposed to launch next week, and everything is falling apart. Are you even getting my messages? Please, please call me back. I'm starting to panic here. The evolution in tone from confused to annoyed to genuinely frightened was almost fascinating to observe. It was like watching someone discover gravity for the first time, that moment when you realize the ground isn't as solid as you thought, and maybe you've been floating all along without realizing it. I deleted that message too. Instead of calling her back, I went out to my garden in the gathering dusk and deadheaded my roses, a peaceful, methodical task that I'd been neglecting while I worried about someone else's problems. The mosquitoes were starting to come out, but I didn't mind their gentle harassment. There was something profoundly satisfying about tending to growing things, about nurturing life that gave back as much as it received. The real storm broke on Saturday morning. It started early, before 7 a.m., with a barrage of text messages that lit up my phone like a slot machine paying out. I was sitting on my porch with my first cup of coffee, watching the mist rise from the valley below and listening to the morning birds, when the messages started coming in rapid succession. Did you cut off my money? What the hell is wrong with you? You are trying to ruin my life. This can't be happening. Answer me. Mom, I know you're there. You are destroying everything I've worked for. Years of building this brand and you want to tear it down. What kind of mother does this? Pick up your phone. I read each message calmly, sipping my coffee and watching a red-tailed hawk circle lazily over Henderson's pasture. The panic and rage radiating from those texts was almost palpable, but instead of making me feel guilty or rushing to fix things, it filled me with a strange sense of peace. This was what accountability looked like when it finally caught up with someone who'd been running from it for years. Then came the voicemail, left at 7:37 a.m. while I was refilling my coffee cup. It was no longer confused or irritated or even frightened. It was pure, unfiltered rage, the kind of fury that only emerges when someone realizes that their safety net has been removed and they might actually have to face the consequences of their choices. "You vindictive old woman," she screamed into the phone, her voice cracking with fury and disbelief. "After everything I've done, after building this brand from nothing, from the ground up, you're trying to destroy me. Do you have any idea what you've done? This business is my entire life. My whole identity is wrapped up in this company. You think this is funny? You think you can just pull the rug out from under me because you're having some kind of menopausal breakdown or midlife crisis or whatever this is? You're not just a weight, you're a goddamn anchor, and you're trying to drag me down to the bottom with you. How dare you? How dare you do this to me?" I listened to the entire 3-minute tirade while sitting peacefully on my porch swing, the phone on speaker so the morning air could carry away the venom in her words. The cicadas provided a steady, indifferent chorus to her breakdown, and a gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes I'd hung from the porch eaves years ago. Nature, it seemed, was completely unmoved by human drama. An anchor. That was a new metaphor, and not entirely inaccurate. I had been her anchor, holding her steady in the choppy waters of the real world, keeping her from drifting too far from shore. And now I had pulled up that anchor, set it aside, and left her to navigate on her own. She was discovering, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, just how strong the current really was when you didn't have someone else quietly rowing for you. I deleted the voicemail and blocked her number. A week later, a letter arrived, full of blame and self-pity. I filed it away and booked a flight to Florida, finally seeing the ocean for the first time. Upon my return, a young farmer named Ben, who had admired my gardening, was waiting. He had bought her failed business for pennies on the dollar. "I know you were the heart of it," he said. "Will you be my partner?" We rebuilt the business, honestly and slowly. One day, Chloe appeared at our market stall, looking humbled in a waitress uniform. She bought a single bar of lavender soap. "It smells like home," she whispered, tears in her eyes, and walked away. I had not destroyed her. I had simply let her find the true cost of a bar of soap. That was a lesson worth more than all the money in the world.